The dust swirled around Rebecca Norton's face as she stumbled forward, the last of her strength fading with each desperate step. The small Montana town of Hatchet Creek shimmered in the distance like a mirage, wavering through her tear-filled eyes as the August heat of 1878 bore down mercilessly. Her traveling dress, once a respectable navy blue, now hung in tatters around her thin frame, stained with the evidence of her arduous journey. The stagecoach that had carried her most of the way had broken an axle some 5 miles back, and the driver, unwilling to wait for repairs with a schedule to keep, had pointed her in the direction of town with little more than a mumbled apology and a canteen half filled with tepid water. As Rebecca's vision clouded, her knees finally gave out. The letter that had brought her here the promise of a better life as the wife of a man she'd never met slipped from her fingers as she fell forward into the unforgiving dust of the main street. Through the ringing in her ears, she heard the sound of boots running toward her, felt strong arms gathering her up before she could fully collapse. "You're home now. Rest easy," a deep voice murmured, and Rebecca caught a glimpse of concerned blue eyes beneath the brim of a worn cowboy hat before darkness claimed her. Thomas O'Malley had been waiting all morning for the stagecoach, pacing the boardwalk in front of the general store with growing anxiety. The telegram had said his mail-order bride would arrive today, and he'd spent the last week preparing the small ranch house, even going so far as to buy a new quilt for the bed and curtains for the windows. When the stagecoach hadn't appeared by noon, he'd begun to worry. Now, cradling the unconscious woman in his arms, he felt a surge of guilt. He should have ridden out to meet the stage when it was late. Instead, she'd been forced to walk miles in the blistering heat. "Doc," Thomas called, carrying Rebecca toward the doctor's office across the street. "Got an emergency here." Dr. Wilson appeared at the door, wiping his hands on a towel. "Bring her in, Tom." "What happened?" "She's my bride," Thomas explained, carefully laying Rebecca on the examination table. "Must have walked in from God knows where. Stage never showed." The doctor moved efficiently, checking her pulse and lifting her eyelids. "Heat exhaustion, dehydration. We need to cool her down and get some water in her. She'll be all right with proper care." He looked up at Thomas. "You say she's your bride, the one you've been corresponding with?" Thomas nodded, removing his hat and running a hand through his sandy brown hair. "Rebecca Norton from Boston. At least, that's who I'm expecting." "Well, she picked a hell of a day to arrive." The doctor began unbuttoning the high collar of Rebecca's dress to help cool her. "Fetch some water from the pump outside and ask Mrs. Parker next door if she can spare some clean clothes. This poor girl's been through enough." Thomas did as instructed, returning shortly with a bucket of water and the promised clothing from the doctor's neighbor. As he re-entered the office, he found Rebecca stirring, her eyelids fluttering. "Where am I?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Thomas moved to her side. "Hatchet Creek, Montana Territory. I'm Thomas O'Malley." He hesitated. "I reckon I'm the man you came to marry." Rebecca's green eyes widened and she tried to sit up, only to fall back with a groan. "I'm so sorry. This isn't how I planned to make my introduction." "Don't you worry about that now," Thomas said gently. "Doc says you need rest." Dr. Wilson handed her a glass of water. "Small sips, miss." "You're quite dehydrated." Rebecca obeyed, her hand trembling as she held the glass. "The stagecoach broke down. The driver said it wasn't far to town." Thomas's jaw tightened. "Barton, should have known he wouldn't see you safely delivered. Man's got the compassion of a rattlesnake." "It's not his fault," Rebecca said weakly. "He had a schedule to keep." "That's no excuse for leaving a lady to fend for herself," Thomas replied, his voice hard with anger. "I'll be having words with him when he gets back to town." Rebecca managed a weak smile. You needn't fight my battles for me, Mr. O'Malley. Thomas, he corrected her, and it's what any decent man would do. The doctor cleared his throat. She needs rest, Tom. I recommend she stay here tonight where I can keep an eye on her. Thomas nodded, reluctant to leave but understanding the wisdom in the doctor's words. Of course. I'll come back in the morning if that's all right with you, Miss Norton. Rebecca, she replied, her eyes already drifting closed. And yes, that would be fine. Thomas hesitated at the door, looking back at the pale woman lying on the examination table. She wasn't what he'd expected, smaller, frailer than the confident tone of her letters had suggested, but there was a quiet determination in her eyes that intrigued him. He'd been prepared to offer her a home and a partnership, not expecting love to enter into the arrangement. Now, seeing her vulnerability and courage, he felt something stir within him that he hadn't anticipated. "Rest well," he said softly, before stepping out into the bright sunlight. The next morning, Rebecca woke feeling considerably better. Dr. Wilson's wife had helped her bathe and change into a borrowed dress the night before, and a good night's sleep had done wonders for her spirits. She sat up in the small cot where she'd spent the night, smoothing down her hair as best she could without a proper brush. A knock at the door heralded the arrival of Thomas O'Malley, hat in hand and a small bundle tucked under his arm. "Good morning," he said, remaining in the doorway. "I'm glad to see you looking more yourself." Rebecca smiled, suddenly shy in the daylight. In their correspondence, they had discussed practical matters: his ranch, her skills as a housekeeper and cook, their mutual desire for children someday, but little about personal matters or appearances. She studied him now, taking in his tall frame, broad shoulders, and the way the sun had weathered his face into pleasant lines around his eyes and mouth. He wasn't handsome in the refined way of the Boston men she knew, but there was something appealing about his straightforward gaze and the gentle way he held himself, as if conscious of his strength. "Thank you for coming to my rescue yesterday," she said. "I fear I made quite a spectacle of myself." Thomas shook his head. "Not at all. Anyone would have struggled with that walk. I brought you a few things." He stepped forward, offering her the bundle. "Nothing fancy, just some essentials from the mercantile. Thought you might need them." Rebecca unwrapped the package to find a hairbrush, a small mirror, a bar of lavender soap, and a simple blue ribbon. The thoughtfulness of the gesture brought unexpected tears to her eyes. "Thank you," she said softly. "That's very kind." Thomas shifted uncomfortably. "It's nothing. Just practical items." But Rebecca knew better. In her 22 years, she'd learned to recognize genuine kindness, and this man, her husband-to-be, had shown more consideration in one small gesture than many had shown her in years. "Dr. Wilson says you're well enough to leave," Thomas continued. "I've arranged for a room at the boarding house if you'd prefer to stay in town for a few days, or—" He hesitated. "My ranch is about 3 miles out. It's not much, but there's a spare room made up for you. I want you to know there's no rush about the wedding. We can take time to get acquainted first." Rebecca considered her options. She had come to Montana to marry Thomas O'Malley, to escape the limited prospects that faced her in Boston after her father's death had left her penniless. The letters they'd exchanged over 6 months had revealed a man of integrity and purpose, if not poetry, but the reality of marriage to a stranger still gave her pause. "I think I would like to see the ranch," she decided. "After all, that's why I've come all this way." Thomas's face brightened. "I've got the wagon outside. Do you feel up to the ride?" "Yes, I believe I do." Rebecca stood, smoothing down the borrowed dress. "Though I should return Mrs. Wilson's dress." "Your trunk arrived on the freight wagon this morning," Thomas informed her. "It's already in the wagon." Rebecca's spirits lifted further at the news. At least she would have her own clothes and few precious belongings. After thanking the doctor and his wife for their hospitality, Rebecca found herself seated beside Thomas on the bench of a sturdy farm wagon, her trunk secured in the back along with several parcels from the mercantile. The day was cooler than the previous one, with a gentle breeze that carried the scent of sage and dust. As they left the small town behind, Thomas pointed out landmarks, the creek that gave the town its name, the distant mountains that marked the territorial boundary, the scattered ranches that belonged to neighbors she would soon meet. Rebecca listened attentively, trying to memorize the unfamiliar landscape that was to be her new home. "Tell me about your journey," Thomas said after a while. "Your letters only mentioned you'd be leaving Boston in July." Rebecca sighed, remembering the long trek. "It was educational. I took the train as far as Cheyenne, then the stage coach the rest of the way. I'd never been west of Philadelphia before. That's a brave undertaking for a woman alone." Rebecca glanced at him. "I didn't have much choice. After my father died, there were few options for me in Boston. I could become a governess or companion, or I could marry. When I saw your advertisement in the newspaper, you chose a stranger in the wilderness," Thomas finished for her, a note of disbelief in his voice. "I chose the possibility of a new beginning," she corrected him. "Your letters spoke of hard work and honest living. That appealed to me more than the alternatives." Thomas was quiet for a moment. "I want to be straight with you, Rebecca. I'm not a wealthy man. The ranch turns a modest profit, enough to live comfortably if we're careful, but there are no luxuries here." "I didn't come expecting luxury," she replied. "I came expecting partnership. That's what you offered in your letters, and that's what I accepted." Thomas nodded, seemingly satisfied with her answer. "Well, here we are," he said as they crested a small rise. "O'Malley Ranch, not much to look at, but it's home." Rebecca took in the small ranch house, the barn and corral, the vegetable garden enclosed by a rough fence, and the open grazing land that stretched beyond. It was indeed modest, but there was something appealing about its simplicity and the obvious care that had gone into its maintenance. "It's lovely," she said sincerely. Thomas gave her a surprised look, then smiled, the first full smile she'd seen from him. It transformed his face, crinkling the corners of his eyes and revealing a dimple in his right cheek. "You don't have to say that." "I never say things I don't mean," Rebecca informed him primly. "It may not be grand, but it's honest. I can respect that." As they pulled up to the house, a large dog came bounding around the corner, barking enthusiastically. "That's Buck," Thomas said. "He's friendly, just excited to meet you." The dog, a mix of shepherd and something larger, approached the wagon with his tail wagging furiously. Rebecca extended her hand for him to sniff, and was rewarded with a warm tongue licking her fingers. "He approves," Thomas chuckled, climbing down from the wagon and coming around to help her down. Rebecca placed her hands on Thomas's shoulders as he lifted her effortlessly to the ground. For a moment, they stood close, and she was acutely aware of his height and the strength in his hands. Then he stepped back, gesturing toward the house. "Let me show you inside. Mrs. Larson, my neighbor, came over yesterday to help clean up. I'm afraid I'm not much of a housekeeper." The interior of the ranch house was simple but comfortable, with a main room that served as both kitchen and living area, and 2 bedrooms off to one side. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, and windows let in plenty of light. The furniture was plain but sturdy, and Rebecca was pleased to see bookshelves filled with volumes along one wall. "You read," she observed, running her fingers along the spines. "Winter evenings are long here," Thomas replied. "I find books good company." Rebecca smiled, feeling a connection in their shared appreciation for literature. "Which bedroom is to be mine?" Thomas led her to the smaller of the 2 rooms. "I prepared this one for you. The other is mine, but I can sleep in the barn until after the wedding if you'd prefer." Rebecca took in the freshly made bed with its new quilt, the curtains at the window, and the small table with a lamp. There was even a vase of wildflowers on the dresser. "You went to a lot of trouble," she said softly. Thomas shrugged. "Wanted you to feel welcome." "Thank you, but there's no need for you to sleep in the barn. We're adults and the arrangement is clear. I'll feel safer knowing you're in the house." If Thomas was surprised by her practical approach, he didn't show it. "As you wish. I'll bring in your trunk, and then perhaps you'd like to rest before dinner. Or I could show you around the ranch if you're feeling up to it." "I'd like to see everything," Rebecca decided. "I've been sitting on trains and stage coaches for weeks. Some fresh air and movement would be welcome." As they walked the property, Thomas pointed out the vegetable garden where he grew most of their food, the chicken coop that provided eggs, the corral where several horses watched them curiously, and the barn where he stored hay and tools. Beyond the immediate buildings, the land stretched out in gentle rolls, dotted with cattle. "It's not a big operation," Thomas explained. "About 50 head of cattle, enough to sell some each year and maintain the herd. I do some horse training on the side, and there's always work to be had in town for a man who knows his way around livestock." Rebecca nodded, appreciating his forthright assessment of their economic situation. "And what will be expected of me, beyond the usual household duties?" Thomas considered the question. "I could use help with the garden and the chickens. Maybe the accounts. I'm not much for numbers, but mostly I want a partner, someone to share the work and the rewards." "That seems fair," Rebecca replied. "I should warn you, I'm a city girl. I know how to keep house and cook, but gardening and animal husbandry will be new to me." "You'll learn," Thomas said confidently. "You seem the type to master whatever you put your mind to." Rebecca felt a flush of pleasure at his assessment. "I'll certainly try." As they completed their tour at the corral, one of the horses, a beautiful chestnut mare, approached the fence, stretching her neck toward Rebecca. "That's Penny," Thomas said. "Seems she wants to make your acquaintance." Rebecca hesitantly reached out to stroke the mare's nose. "She's beautiful." "She's yours if you want her. Every rancher's wife needs her own mount." Rebecca turned to him in surprise. "Mine, but I don't know how to ride." Thomas smiled. "As I said, you'll learn. Penny's gentle and smart. She'll take care of you while you figure it out." The gift of the horse touched Rebecca deeply. It wasn't merely a gesture of welcome, but an acknowledgement that she would need independence on the ranch, the ability to come and go on her own. "Thank you," she said simply. "I'd be honored to have her." That evening, after a simple dinner that Thomas had prepared, proving he wasn't entirely helpless in the kitchen, they sat by the fire, the cooling night air making the warmth welcome. Rebecca had changed into one of her own dresses, a practical calico that was far more suitable for ranch life than the fashionable traveling dress she'd arrived in. "When would you like to have the wedding?" Thomas asked, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. Rebecca looked up from the book she'd been examining. "I hadn't given it much thought. Is there a church in town?" "There is, though the preacher only comes through once a month. He's due next Sunday." Thomas hesitated. "But if you'd rather wait, get to know each other better first." Rebecca considered the man across from her. In the day they'd spent together, she'd observed his kindness, his work ethic, and his integrity. The connection between them wasn't romantic, not yet, but there was a foundation of respect that she valued. Sunday would be fine, she decided. "That was our agreement after all, unless you've had second thoughts." Thomas shook his head. "No second thoughts, just want to be sure you're certain. Once it's done, there's no going back." "I understand the permanence of marriage, Thomas," Rebecca said gently. "I didn't travel 2,000 miles on a whim," he nodded, accepting her decision. "Sunday it is, then. We should ride into town tomorrow, introduce you to some folks. Mrs. Larson has invited us for supper. She's eager to meet you." "That sounds lovely. I'd like to thank her for helping prepare the house." Rebecca stifled a yawn, the events of the past 2 days finally catching up with her. Thomas noticed immediately. "You should rest. It's been a long day." Rebecca didn't argue. She was bone tired, and the prospect of a real her bed in her new home was irresistibly appealing. "Good night, Thomas," she said, rising from her chair. "Good night, Rebecca." He remained by the fire, watching as she made her way to her bedroom. "Sleep well." In the privacy of her small room, Rebecca sat on the edge of the bed, taking stock of her situation. She had come to Montana expecting a practical arrangement, a marriage of convenience that would provide security for her and companionship for Thomas. What she hadn't expected was the gentle consideration he'd shown her, or the way his rare smiles made something flutter in her chest. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was a beginning, and for the first time since her father's death, Rebecca felt hope for the future. The next few days passed in a blur of activity as Rebecca settled into life at the O'Malley Ranch. True to his word, Thomas took her into town the following day to meet the local residents and purchase a few additional items she needed. The people of Hatchet Creek were welcoming, curious about the Boston lady who had come to marry their neighbor, but respectful of her privacy. Mrs. Larson, their closest neighbor at just half a mile down the road, proved to be a friendly woman in her 50s who immediately took Rebecca under her wing. "It's about time Thomas found himself a wife," she declared over dinner at her modest home. "That man works too hard and speaks too little. But he's good through and through, make no mistake." "I've found him to be very kind," Rebecca replied, conscious of Thomas sitting nearby, pretending not to listen. Mrs. Larson nodded approvingly. "You two will suit, I think. Now, tell me what you know about gardening, dear. You'll need to put up preserves for winter before long." By the time Sunday arrived, Rebecca had begun to develop a routine at the ranch. She woke early with Thomas, prepared breakfast, and then tackled the household chores while he worked with the livestock. In the afternoons, Thomas gave her riding lessons, teaching her the basics of horsemanship on the patient Penny. The mare seemed to understand Rebecca's nervousness and moved with careful deliberation under her inexperienced hands. Each evening they shared dinner and then sat by the fire, sometimes reading, sometimes talking about their pasts or their hopes for the ranch. Thomas, she discovered, had come west from Pennsylvania after the war, seeking a fresh start away from the memories of battle. He'd worked as a cowhand on several ranches before saving enough to buy his own small spread 5 years earlier. "I never thought much about marriage until last winter," he admitted the night before their wedding. "The snow was so deep, and the nights were long and quiet. I realized I didn't want to face another winter alone." Rebecca understood loneliness all too well. After her father's death, she had lived as a guest in her cousin's home, tolerated but never truly welcomed. The feeling of being an outsider, of having no place to truly belong, had driven her to answer Thomas's advertisement as much as economic necessity. "I think many of us fear being alone," she said softly, "even when we're surrounded by people." Thomas studied her face in the firelight. "You won't be alone here, Rebecca, even if things between us never become more than they are now. This is your home for as long as you want it." His words warmed her more than the fire. "Thank you. That means a great deal to me." The wedding itself was a simple affair. The traveling preacher, a kindly man named Reverend Johnson, performed the ceremony in the small wooden church that served the community. Mrs. Larson had insisted on decorating with wildflowers, and several of the townspeople attended, curious to witness the mail-order bride becoming Mrs. O'Malley. Rebecca wore her best dress, a pale blue cotton with white lace at the collar and cuffs. Thomas, looking uncomfortable in a clean shirt and string tie, met her at the front of the church, his expression solemn but his eyes warm. The vows were traditional, promises to love, honor, and cherish until death parted them. As Rebecca repeated the words, she wondered if it was possible to promise love when it didn't yet exist. But she could honestly promise to honor and cherish this man who had shown her nothing but respect and kindness since her arrival. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Thomas hesitated before leaning down to place a chaste kiss on her lips. It was brief, barely more than a touch, but Rebecca felt a surprising spark of warmth at the contact. "Congratulations, Mrs. O'Malley," he said quietly as they turned to face the small congregation. Mrs. O'Malley. The name still felt strange but not unpleasant. Rebecca smiled up at her new husband. "Thank you, Mr. O'Malley." A small reception followed at the town's only restaurant, with cake provided by the owner's wife and coffee for everyone. The townspeople offered their congratulations and welcome, and several of the women extended invitations for Rebecca to join various social gatherings. By mid-afternoon, they were heading back to the ranch, husband and wife in the eyes of the law and the community. Rebecca felt a flutter of nervousness as they approached the house. Tonight, the nature of their relationship would change. Though Thomas had been nothing but respectful, the reality of marriage included physical intimacy, something they had not discussed in their correspondence. Thomas seemed to sense her unease as he helped her down from the wagon. "Nothing has to change right away," he said quietly. "I meant what I said about taking time." Rebecca met his gaze. "I know and I appreciate your consideration, but we are married now. I'm not afraid of what that means." Thomas's expression softened. "You're a remarkable woman, Rebecca O'Malley. I'm fortunate to have found you." That night, after a simple supper and the usual evening chores, Rebecca prepared for bed with extra care, washing with the lavender soap Thomas had given her and brushing her hair until it shone. The nightgown she slipped into was modest but made of fine cotton, one of the few luxuries she'd brought from her previous life. When she entered the main room, Thomas was banking the fire for the night. He looked up as she approached, and Rebecca saw something flicker in his eyes, appreciation, perhaps, or desire. "You look beautiful," he said simply. Rebecca felt a blush warm her cheeks. "Thank you." Thomas straightened, wiping his hands on his trousers. "I'll just get cleaned up." When he returned, freshly washed and wearing only a clean shirt and trousers, the nervousness Rebecca had been holding at bay returned in full force. This man was her husband, but still largely a stranger. The thought of sharing his bed, of allowing the intimacies of marriage, was both frightening and somehow exciting. Thomas approached her slowly, stopping just within arm's reach. "We can wait, Rebecca. I won't press you." Rebecca took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "I don't want to wait. But I would ask for patience. I've never. That is, my experience is limited to." "You've never been with a man," Thomas finished for her, his voice gentle. "I suspected as much." Rebecca nodded, grateful for his understanding. "Have you been with women before?" A hint of color touched Thomas's cheeks. "Yes, though not as many as some might think. I'm not a frequenter of saloons or brothels, if that's your concern." "It wasn't," Rebecca assured him. "I just wanted to know if one of us should know what we're doing." Thomas laughed then, a warm, rich sound that Rebecca had rarely heard from him. "I believe we'll figure it out together." He offered her his hand, and after only a moment's hesitation, Rebecca took it, allowing him to lead her to what was now their shared bedroom. What followed was a gentle initiation into the physical aspects of marriage. Thomas proved to be as considerate a lover as he was a husband, taking his time to ensure Rebecca's comfort and pleasure. Though there was initial discomfort, the patience and tenderness Thomas showed made the experience far more positive than Rebecca had feared. Afterward, lying in the circle of his arms, Rebecca felt a strange new contentment. This wasn't love, not the passionate, all-consuming emotion described in novels, but it was a beginning, a foundation of respect and physical compatibility upon which deeper feelings might grow. "Are you all right?" Thomas asked, his voice a rumble against her ear where her head rested on his chest. "Yes," Rebecca replied honestly, "better than all right." Thomas's arms tightened around her. "Good. That's good." They fell asleep that way, entwined in the darkness, husband and wife in truth as well as name. The weeks that followed settled into a new rhythm. Rebecca's days were filled with the tasks of running a household and learning the ways of ranch life. Thomas proved to be a patient teacher, showing her how to gather eggs without upsetting the hens, how to tend the vegetable garden, and how to identify the herbs that grew wild on the property. Her riding lessons continued, and soon Rebecca was able to accompany Thomas on short rides around the property. She grew to love these outings, the feeling of freedom that came with sitting astride Penny, the wind in her hair and the vast Montana sky above. As summer gave way to early autumn, Rebecca found herself watching her husband with increasing affection. She noticed the way the sun brought out gold highlights in his brown hair, the graceful strength with which he handled the horses, the kindness in his interactions with neighboring farmers and ranchers. Thomas was not a man of many words, but his actions spoke volumes about his character. For his part, Thomas seemed to find increasing pleasure in Rebecca's company. He began to linger over breakfast, engaging her in conversation about books they'd both read or sharing stories from his days as a cowhand. In the evenings, he would sometimes read aloud to her while she mended clothing or worked on the quilt she had started for their bed. Their physical relationship also deepened, becoming more natural and satisfying as they learned each other's preferences and responses. Rebecca discovered a side of herself she hadn't known existed, a woman capable of passion and desire, who looked forward to the nights spent in her husband's arms. It was during one such night in early October that Rebecca realized the nature of her feelings had changed. Thomas had returned late from helping a neighbor with a difficult calving, exhausted and splattered with mud. Rebecca had drawn him a bath, washing his back and massaging his tired shoulders until he groaned with pleasure. Later, as they lay together in the darkness, Thomas's breathing even in sleep beside her, Rebecca acknowledged the truth. She had come to Montana expecting a practical partnership, but somewhere along the way, she had fallen in love with her husband. The realization both thrilled and frightened her. Thomas had never spoken of love, had offered companionship and respect, but not romance. Would he welcome her deeper feelings, or would they make him uncomfortable? Rebecca decided to keep her discovery to herself for the time being, uncertain of how to proceed. But knowing her own heart brought a new dimension to their relationship, at least from her perspective. She found herself looking for ways to show her affection, preparing his favorite meals, leaving notes in his saddlebag when he rode out to check the cattle, listening more attentively when he spoke of his plans for the ranch. Thomas noticed the change, though he couldn't pinpoint its cause. One evening in late October, as they sat by the fire after dinner, he broached the subject. "You seem different lately," he observed. "Happier, maybe." Rebecca looked up from her sewing. "Do I? I suppose I am happy. I've grown to love it here." Thomas studied her face in the firelight. "Just the place, or?" Rebecca felt her heart quicken. "The place, the life we're building." She hesitated, then added softly, "And you, Thomas, I've grown to care for you very deeply." Thomas was silent for so long that Rebecca feared she'd said too much. Then he set aside the bridle he'd been repairing and moved to kneel beside her chair. "Rebecca," he said, taking her hands in his, "when I sent for a mail-order bride, I was looking for a practical arrangement, someone to share the work and ease the loneliness I never expected." He faltered, and Rebecca held her breath, uncertain whether his next words would bring joy or heartbreak. "I never expected to find someone like you," Thomas continued. "Someone who makes me look forward to coming home at night, someone who makes me want to be a better man. I'm not good with words, but I need you to know that I care for you too, more than I thought possible." Relief and happiness flooded through Rebecca. "Are you saying you love me, Thomas O'Malley?" she asked, a smile tugging at her lips. Thomas's eyes crinkled at the corners. "I reckon I am, Mrs. O'Malley, though I'm making a poor job of it." Rebecca cupped his face in her hands. "On the contrary, I think you're doing just fine." Their kiss was different from those they had shared before, deeper, more meaningful, an acknowledgement of the feelings that had grown between them over the past months. When they finally broke apart, Thomas rested his forehead against hers. "I never thought I'd find love out here. Figured that wasn't in the cards for me. And I never thought I'd find it with a man I married for security," Rebecca admitted. "Life has a way of surprising us." Thomas smiled, that rare full smile that transformed his face and made Rebecca's heart skip. "That it does, my love, that it does." As winter approached, the ranch required additional preparation. Thomas worked long hours ensuring the cattle had adequate shelter and feed for the harsh Montana winter. Rebecca preserved the last of the garden's bounty, putting up jars of vegetables and fruits that would sustain them through the cold months. They received word that a severe early winter storm was approaching from the north, and Thomas spent a frantic day bringing the cattle in from the far pastures. Rebecca watched anxiously from the porch as the sky darkened and the wind picked up, whipping her skirts around her legs. "Come inside," Thomas called as he finished securing the barn doors. "It's about to get bad." They barely made it into the house before the storm hit in full force, howling wind driving snow against the windows with alarming ferocity. Thomas built up the fire while Rebecca prepared a hot meal, grateful for the sturdy walls that protected them from the elements. That night, they lay in bed listening to the storm rage outside, the house creaking under the assault of the wind. "Will the animals be all right?" Rebecca asked, concern evident in her voice. Thomas pulled her closer. "They're secure in the barn and the shelters. We've done all we can." Rebecca nodded against his chest. "I never imagined winter could be so fierce." "Montana winters demand respect," Thomas agreed. "But there's a beauty to them too. You'll see, once the storm passes." They fell asleep to the sound of the wind, wrapped in each other's warmth. The storm lasted 3 days, burying the ranch under several feet of snow. When it finally cleared, Rebecca stood on the porch, awestruck by the transformed landscape. Everything was white and gleaming in the morning sunlight, pristine and untouched. Thomas joined her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "What do you think? Different from Boston winters?" "It's beautiful," Rebecca breathed. "Like another world entirely." "We're snowed in for at least a few days," Thomas told her. "The path to town won't be passable until some of this melts or gets packed down." Rebecca turned to him with a mischievous smile. "Whatever shall we do with ourselves, Mr. O'Malley?" Thomas laughed, pulling her close. "I'm sure we'll think of something, Mrs. O'Malley." The enforced isolation brought a new intimacy to their relationship. Without the daily demands of ranch work, they had time to truly talk, sharing stories from their childhoods and dreams for the future. Thomas spoke of his hope to expand the ranch, perhaps breeding horses as well as raising cattle. Rebecca confessed her desire to someday start a small school for the children of neighboring ranchers, who currently had to travel all the way to town for education. "You'd make a wonderful teacher," Thomas told her. "We could build a schoolroom onto the house, or convert the storage shed." Rebecca was touched by his immediate support. "You wouldn't mind." "Mind. I think it's a fine idea. Children around here deserve an education, and you have the knowledge to provide it." As they talked, Rebecca realized how fully their lives had become intertwined, how naturally they now planned for a shared future. What had begun as a practical arrangement had evolved into a true partnership based on mutual respect, shared goals, and most surprisingly, love. When the snow finally melted enough to make the road passable, Thomas hitched up the sleigh to take Rebecca into town for supplies. The streets of Hatchet Creek were still deep with snow, but most businesses had managed to clear their entrances, and the town was buzzing with activity after the enforced isolation of the storm. As they loaded their purchases into the sleigh, Rebecca noticed Thomas speaking intently with Mr. Peterson, the owner of the general store. The two men shook hands, and Thomas returned to her with a pleased expression. "What was that about?" Rebecca asked as they set off for home. "Just some business," Thomas replied evasively. "Nothing for you to worry about." Rebecca raised an eyebrow. "Thomas O'Malley, are you keeping secrets from your wife?" he chuckled. "Maybe a small one, you'll find out soon enough." Rebecca decided not to press the matter, content to wait for Thomas to share whatever he was planning. The ride home was peaceful, the sleigh runners making a satisfying shush through the snow as they passed through the white-clad landscape. Christmas approached, bringing with it a festive atmosphere despite their isolation. Rebecca decorated the house with pine boughs and red ribbons, and baked special treats from recipes her mother had taught her. Thomas returned from a trip to town with mysterious packages that he refused to let Rebecca see, storing them in the barn until Christmas morning. On Christmas Eve, they attended a service at the small church in town, joining their neighbors in singing carols and celebrating the holiday. The church was warm with candlelight and filled with the scent of pine and spices. Rebecca, seated beside Thomas in the pew, felt a sense of belonging she had never experienced in the formal churches of Boston. After the service, they joined other ranching families for a communal dinner at the town hall. There was roast beef and ham, potatoes and pies, and plenty of good cheer. Rebecca found herself drawn into conversations with other women, no longer the outsider but an accepted member of the community. "Thomas can't take his eyes off you," Mrs. Larson observed with a knowing smile. "That man is smitten." Rebecca glanced across the room to where Thomas stood talking with several other ranchers, his gaze indeed finding hers with regularity. "The feeling is mutual," she admitted. Mrs. Larson patted her hand. "I'm glad. You've been good for him. He smiles now." The ride home under a star-filled sky was magical. Thomas tucked the blankets around Rebecca to keep her warm, and they traveled in companionable silence, the only sounds the jingle of the harness and the soft fall of the horses' hooves in the snow. "I have something for you," Thomas said as they approached the ranch. "I was going to wait until morning, but—" He reached into his coat and withdrew a small package. Rebecca unwrapped it carefully to reveal a delicate silver locket on a fine chain. "Oh, Thomas, it's beautiful. Open it," he urged. Inside was a tiny portrait of Thomas, professionally done during one of his trips to town. On the opposite side was a space, waiting to be filled. "I thought maybe we could put in a picture of both of us, once the photographer comes through in the spring," Thomas explained. "Or maybe a child someday." Rebecca looked up at him, tears glistening in her eyes. "I love it, and I love you." Thomas leaned across to kiss her, the sleigh momentarily forgotten as they expressed their feelings in the starlight. Christmas morning brought more gifts: a beautiful wool shawl Rebecca had knitted for Thomas, a set of books he'd ordered for her from back east. But the real surprise came after breakfast, when Thomas asked Rebecca to put on her coat and boots. "I have one more gift," he said, eyes twinkling with excitement. "But it's in the barn." Curious, Rebecca followed him through the snow to the barn, where he led her to a stall she hadn't noticed before. Inside was a beautiful calf, just a few days old, with unusual markings: a perfect white star on its forehead against a rich red coat. "She's the start of our own herd," Thomas explained. "I've been talking with Peterson about acquiring some breeding stock in the spring. This little lady is our first." Rebecca stared at him in surprise. "Our own herd," Thomas nodded. "You brought a dowry when you came: not money, but courage and determination. This ranch is ours, Rebecca, not just mine. I want to build something that belongs to both of us, something we can pass down to our children someday." Rebecca felt tears well up again. The gift wasn't just a calf. It was Thomas's acknowledgement of their equal partnership, his commitment to their shared future. "She needs a name," Thomas prompted when Rebecca remained silent. Rebecca reached out to stroke the calf's soft nose. "Star," she said simply, "for new beginnings." Thomas put his arm around her waist, drawing her close to his side. "I like that." The remainder of the winter passed in a pattern of work and cozy evenings by the fire. Rebecca began planning her school, writing to her former teachers in Boston for advice on curricula and teaching methods. Thomas worked on designs for expanding the ranch house to accommodate both the school and the family they hoped to have. In late February, Rebecca made a discovery that brought both joy and anxiety. After several mornings of nausea and unusual fatigue, she realized she was with child. She kept the knowledge to herself for a few days, wanting to be certain before sharing the news with Thomas. One evening, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Rebecca decided the time was right. "Thomas," she began, setting aside her sewing, "I have something to tell you." Thomas looked up from the ledger where he'd been calculating their spring expenses. "What is it, love?" "I believe I'm going to have a baby," Rebecca said, watching his face carefully. "Sometime in late summer or early fall, if my calculations are correct." Thomas stared at her for a long moment, then set the ledger aside with deliberate care. "A baby," he repeated, his voice filled with wonder. "We're going to have a child." Rebecca nodded, still uncertain of his reaction. "Are you pleased?" Thomas crossed to her chair and dropped to his knees before her, taking her hands in his. "Pleased, Rebecca, I'm overjoyed. A child of our own." He placed a gentle hand on her still flat stomach. "Our family." Relief washed over Rebecca at his evident happiness. "I was a bit worried." "It's sooner than we planned." Thomas shook his head. "Plans change. This is a blessing, not a problem." His acceptance and joy confirmed what Rebecca already knew, that she had found not just security in this marriage, but a true partner who would stand beside her through whatever life brought their way. Spring arrived with a rush of activity. The melting snow revealed the winter's toll on the ranch, with fences to be repaired and buildings to be maintained. Thomas worked from dawn to dusk, preparing the land for the growing season and tending to the livestock. Rebecca, despite her morning sickness, managed the household and helped where she could, though Thomas was adamant that she not overtax herself. As promised, Thomas began work on an addition to the ranch house, a room that would serve as a schoolroom until needed for their expanding family. Rebecca watched with pride as the structure took shape under his skilled hands, with occasional help from neighboring ranchers who came to assist in the spirit of community that defined frontier life. Word of Rebecca's pregnancy spread through the small community, bringing visits from neighboring women bearing gifts and advice. Mrs. Larson was particularly attentive, sharing her experiences as a mother of 5 and promising to be on hand when Rebecca's time came. "First babies often take their time," she assured Rebecca during one such visit. "But don't you worry. Between me and Doc Wilson, you'll be well looked after." Rebecca was grateful for the support. Though she tried to hide it from Thomas, the prospect of giving birth so far from modern medical care sometimes frightened her. Her own mother had died in childbirth when Rebecca was just 10 years old, a loss that had shaped her entire life. Thomas, sensing her unspoken fears, was more attentive than ever. He insisted she rest during the hottest part of the day and took over more of the household chores as her pregnancy progressed. His tenderness touched Rebecca deeply, reinforcing her certainty that they would face this new challenge as they had faced everything else together. By early summer, Rebecca's condition was clearly visible, and Thomas's protective instincts intensified. He rarely let her out of his sight, arranging for Mrs. Larson to stay at the ranch when he needed to be away for more than a few hours. "You're hovering, Thomas," Rebecca teased one evening as he insisted on bringing her tea rather than letting her get it herself. Thomas had the grace to look sheepish. "I can't help it. I need to know you and the baby are safe." Rebecca softened at his obvious concern. "We are safe. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time." "I know," Thomas sighed. "It's just, you're everything to me, Rebecca. You and this child. I couldn't bear it if anything happened to either of you." Rebecca reached for his hand, placing it over the spot where their baby had just kicked. "Feel that? That's our child telling you not to worry so much." Thomas's face lit up at the movement under his palm. "Strong like his mother. Or her mother," Rebecca corrected with a smile. "We don't know yet. Boy or girl, it doesn't matter," Thomas assured her. "Just healthy and happy." As Rebecca's time grew nearer, the heat of late August made her increasingly uncomfortable. She moved slowly around the ranch house, her swollen belly making even simple tasks challenging. Thomas insisted on hiring a local girl, Jenny Parker, to help with the heavier housework, despite Rebecca's protests that they couldn't afford the expense. "Your health and the baby's are worth more than money," he said firmly when Rebecca questioned the decision. "Besides, the ranch is doing well this year. We can afford a little help." It was true that their financial situation had improved. The cattle were thriving, and Thomas's skill with horses had brought additional income as ranchers from miles around brought their difficult mounts to him for training. Rebecca had even contributed by tutoring several neighboring children in preparation for opening her school after the baby was born. On a hot September evening, Rebecca felt the first twinges of what she recognized as labor pains. She said nothing to Thomas at first, not wanting to alarm him until she was certain. But as the pains increased in frequency and intensity, she knew it was time. "Thomas," she said calmly as he came in from the evening chores, "I think you should ride for Mrs. Larson and the doctor. The baby is coming." Thomas froze, his face paling. "Are you sure? It's nearly 3 weeks early." "I'm sure," Rebecca confirmed, wincing as another contraction tightened across her abdomen. "Babies come when they're ready, not according to our calculations." Thomas was in motion instantly, helping Rebecca to bed before racing to saddle his fastest horse. "I'll be back as soon as I can," he promised, kissing her forehead. "Hold on, love." Rebecca tried to smile reassuringly. "We'll be fine. Just hurry." The hours that followed were a blur of pain and determination. Mrs. Larson arrived first, taking charge with the confidence of experience. She set water to boil and laid out clean linens, then sat beside Rebecca, coaching her through the contractions. "You're doing wonderfully," she assured Rebecca as the labor progressed. First babies often take their time, but yours seems eager to meet the world, Doctor. Wilson arrived shortly after midnight, looking disheveled but alert. He examined Rebecca briefly, then nodded in satisfaction. Everything's proceeding normally. You're doing fine, Mrs. O'Malley. Thomas paced outside the bedroom door, driven from the room by Mrs. Larson, who declared that husbands were more hindrance than help at such times. Each cry from Rebecca tore at his heart, making him feel helpless and afraid. Just before dawn, a new cry pierced the air, the lusty wail of a newborn taking its first breath. Thomas froze, his heart pounding as he waited for someone to call him in. It was Dr. Wilson who opened the door, his tired face breaking into a smile. "Congratulations, Thomas. You have a healthy daughter." Thomas entered the bedroom on shaky legs to find Rebecca propped up against the pillows, her face exhausted but radiant, a small bundle cradled in her arms. "Come meet your daughter," she said softly. Thomas approached the bed with reverence, gazing down at the tiny red face framed by a wisp of dark hair. "She's perfect," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Rebecca shifted the baby so Thomas could take her, guiding his arms into the proper position to support the newborn's head. "She has your eyes, I think." Thomas stared in wonder at the child in his arms, overwhelmed by a surge of love so powerful it nearly brought him to his knees. "What shall we call her?" "I was thinking of Sarah," Rebecca suggested. "After my mother." "Sarah O'Malley," Thomas tested the name. "It's beautiful, like her." Mrs. Larson, who had been quietly cleaning up, smiled at the new family. "She's a fine, strong girl. You did well, both of you." As the sun rose over the Montana landscape, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, the O'Malley family welcomed their first day together. Thomas sat on the edge of the bed, one arm around Rebecca and the other cradling their daughter, his heart fuller than he had ever thought possible. "I love you," he murmured against Rebecca's hair. "Both of you more than I can say." Rebecca leaned against him, tired but content. "And we love you, our protector, our provider, our home." Thomas thought back to the day Rebecca had arrived, collapsing in the dust of Hatchet Creek, exhausted and afraid but determined to forge a new life. He remembered gathering her up, telling her she was home now and could rest easy. Little had he known then how completely she would transform his life, turning his simple ranch into a true home and his solitary existence into a family. "Rest now," he told her, easing her back against the pillows. "I'll watch over you both." As Rebecca drifted into much-needed sleep, Thomas continued to hold their daughter, marveling at her tiny fingers and the perfect curve of her cheek. Outside, the ranch was awakening to a new day, cattle lowing in the distance, chickens clucking in the yard. But inside this room, time seemed suspended in a bubble of peace and wonder. Thomas O'Malley, once a solitary rancher resigned to a life of hard work and quiet evenings, now found himself at the center of a family. The woman who had collapsed in the dust that summer day had indeed found rest and home with him, but she had given him far more in return: love, purpose, and now this miraculous new life. As Sarah's tiny hand curled around his finger, Thomas made a silent promise to his daughter and her mother. He would protect them, provide for them, and love them with every breath in his body. Whatever challenges the frontier might bring, they would face them together, as a family. The years that followed brought both joys and challenges to the O'Malley family. Rebecca's school became a reality, with children from neighboring ranches riding in 3 days a week for lessons in the converted room. Thomas expanded the ranch, adding to their cattle herd and developing a reputation for breeding quality horses that brought buyers from as far away as Denver. Sarah grew into a spirited child with her father's quiet determination and her mother's quick intelligence. By the time she was 4, she was following Thomas around the ranch, insisting on helping with chores and asking endless questions about the animals and the land. On a warm spring morning in 1883, as Rebecca watched Thomas teaching Sarah to ride her first pony, a gentle old mare named Daisy, she felt a familiar flutter in her abdomen. Placing a hand over the slight swell that was just becoming noticeable beneath her dress, she smiled. Their family would be growing again by fall. Later that evening, after Sarah was tucked into bed with a story, Rebecca shared her news with Thomas. His reaction was everything she had hoped for: joy, excitement, and tender concern for her well-being. "Another child," he said wonderingly, his hand gentle on her stomach. "Our family is growing just as our ranch has grown." Rebecca leaned into his embrace, feeling the solid strength that had supported her through the past 5 years. "I never imagined being so happy," she confessed. "When I stepped off that stagecoach, I was just hoping for security and respect. I found so much more." Thomas smiled, the lines around his eyes crinkling in the way she loved. "As did I, my love, as did I." Outside, the Montana sunset painted the sky in brilliant colors, illuminating the land that had become their home. Inside, wrapped in each other's arms, Thomas and Rebecca O'Malley counted their blessings and looked forward to the future they would continue to build together, a future that had begun when a mail-order bride collapsed in the dust, and a cowboy told her she was home.